All right, good evening. I will call the Provo City Planning Commission hearing for January 8th, 2020 to order. It is 6:03 p.m. We originally had 6 items on the agenda tonight. However, items 4 and 5 have been continued to another date, so we will not be reading those in this evening. The items on the agenda that are marked with an asterisk are legislative, and the planning commissioners will make recommendations on those items. Municipal council will make a final decision. And it looks like everything we have that we will hear tonight is going to be legislative. Before we start off then, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance led by Mr. Howard.
Please rise and join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
All right, commissioners, we'll start with roll call, starting with Ms. Jensen on my left. And please state your name for the record and whether you have any conflicts with any agenda items this evening.
Do I hold it down? Lisa Jensen, and I don't have any conflicts.
Laurie Urquiaga, no conflicts.
Dave Anderson, no conflicts.
Deborah Jensen, no conflicts.
Robert Knudsen, no conflicts.
Andrew Howard, no conflicts.
Thank you, commissioners. All right, item 1 on our agenda this evening, Quinn Peterson, Downtown Neighborhood Chair, requests an ordinance amendment to allow approval of restaurants with ancillary microbrewing as a permitted use in the SC3, DT1, and DT2 zones. This has citywide application, and Mr. Ardmore will present item 1.
Thank you. So this is a pretty brief ordinance amendment. I've highlighted the language on the top line there of the summary on your screens. That will be inserted into the permitted uses for those 3 zones. Currently, restaurants can serve alcohol with a Class B liquor license, but that alcohol comes from vendors and so forth, and then they sell it at their establishments. So this would actually open the door for restaurants to brew on site and to sell. Same regulations from the Class B liquor license, that only 40% of your sales could be from alcohol. The rest would have to be from food items. Staff doesn't really see a large difference between what's existing now, what's allowed now, and what this would allow. So we've recommended approval on this going forward. If you have any questions, I can take those.
Great, thank you. Mr. Knudsen.
On the third item there, where it says alcohol sales cannot account for more than 40%, how do you regulate that? How would you ever?
I don't know, that's through the state license program.
Enforce it? How would you ever regulate it?
That's a great question. The applicant might be able to comment on that when they come up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The state does that. It's required to renew the license.
Any other questions for staff from the commissioners? All right, seeing none, I'll invite Mr. Quinn, the applicant, or Mr. Peterson, rather, to present his take on item 1.
Oh, well, I'm just here to answer questions. I don't have anything else to add. I think we're really benefited in our downtown. We have 78 different eating establishments between coffee shops, restaurants, and a number of things. And what's really neat is that every single one of them is locally owned. It's a really unique claim that our downtown has. And it allows a really neat variety of food options, especially because of the cultural diversity in Provo, because so many people have experience in other countries. Really, what we're just trying to offer is no additional alcohol, nothing to do with the bars, but it's just allowing these different chefs to also incorporate, if they're approved by the state, to brew their own alcoholic beverages as well.
Wouldn't you say from a competitive advantage or competitive perspective that Provo may be losing some traffic to other areas that allow such things?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I work a whole bunch with tourism. We work a lot with the CVB. And so when there's a group that's looking to either relocate a corporation here or to send a convention here, I take them to lunch. We show them downtown. We talk about why it's a great place for their event. And the number one reason that we don't get these groups, when they choose elsewhere, we do a postmortem and find out it's because we didn't have enough nice alcohol establishments. Unfortunately, some of the places that we have to drink right now, they're not the places that a lot of the tourists and professionals would choose to patronize. And so we just want to offer some new high-end opportunities for this demographic.
Mr. Knudsen?
Is the microbrewing, is there certain laws that they have to apply by? State laws as well as county laws or city laws or whatever?
There are.
In the brewing? Because I know as kids, we thought we were going to take the neighbor's grapes and, make some
Brew 'em up.
hooch or something,
And
And we were lucky we didn't poison somebody or blow up somebody's shed or something. But I just wondered if there weren't some kind of rules or regulations as far as cleanliness, all those kind of issues that go with it.
Totally. Those things are all already in place, and they're handled at a state level. Really, this is all just, we didn't really have a yes or a no in Provo, and we're just allowing the opportunity for those people to apply for those types of inspections and licenses that happen at a state level.
Mr. Anderson?
Just generally speaking, do we have a feel for how Provo's regulations for the sale of alcohol compare with the state? Are we generally a lot more restrictive than the baseline, and in what kinds of ways?
So, yes and no. Most alcohol restrictions, they do happen at a state level. And Utah as a state tends to have a few more restrictions than other states. The primary differences in Provo are, one, we didn't have a land use opportunity for brew pubs. And so this is just allowing that. That was one restriction. Two is 15, 20 years ago, as the downtown was largely vacant, while a lot of the exodus from downtowns was moving into malls, our downtown was filling up with bars, pawn shops, smoke shops, tattoo shops. It was becoming an undesirable destination. And because our downtown is on the National Historic Registry, we didn't want it to become that sort of destination. And so there were some things put in place to eliminate that land use for those listed businesses. Now that downtown has grown and thrived so much, we no longer have this vacancy problem. Instead, what we've created is a monopoly for the two bars that we have, because you can't have another one ever. So that is another obstacle that we do have in Provo, where we have given a monopoly to our current bars, and we will never have a competitor unless something changes.
So in addition to the microbrewery language, I mean, a bar, tavern.
That is a separate issue.
It's a separate issue, right?
Separate issue.
Yeah. But that's currently precluded from the zoning districts that we're looking at here.
I don't know. I don't know what the word precluded means.
It's not allowed. It's not permitted.
You're not allowed to do it anywhere. Well, there is a place down in, Bill, if you could add to this.
Yeah, we don't allow any more bars in downtown.
Okay.
That's a different license than a Class B. The Class B license is where 60% of your sales come from the restaurant, 40% come from alcohol. You have to eat on site. You can't come in and just order alcohol like you can in a bar. So it's a different license, and we don't allow that type of license for a bar in the downtown anymore.
So we're talking about here, this is akin to like a Chili's, Olive
Yeah.
Garden.
Yep.
Yeah.
Restaurant that
Strap
happens to
tank.
serve
Yeah.
as well.
They're
This
required to
is-
order food and not just alcohol.
Right.
Exactly.
But, for example, proximity to things like a park,
All those
church,
things still
all
apply.
that still
All
comes
those
into
things
play
still
here.
apply.
Yeah, park, school, church,
Yeah.
percentage, and all the rules you mentioned about cleanliness, production, all that is in place. But that's a very good question about Provo's rules regarding alcohol.
That was a good question. Any other questions, commissioners? No? All right, thank you. So am I correct that Mr. Peterson, you're also the downtown neighborhood chair?
Correct.
Okay. So are there any other neighborhood chairs present who would like to speak to item 1?
Just a small correction, downtown's actually the only neighborhood in the city that has 2 neighborhood chairs. So I represent the businesses. The residential neighborhood chair is actually Rico right here. So,
Did you have any comments for us this evening? We'd like to hear from the neighborhood chairs to see if there's support or any opposition to any items on the agenda.
Rich, do I say who I am? Rich Nelson, Downtown Neighborhood Chair. I'm in complete support of it. I just think it's a need that we have in the downtown area. I think it's important for people that are visiting. I live in the Wells Fargo building, and in order for me to go just have a glass of wine after dinner, I have to go to the Marriott, and it would be nice to go to some place where, you know, it's you're not paying $18 for a glass of wine. You know, I think it'd be great. I think it'd be great. I think more people are moving downtown. There's more residents downtown. We have that beautiful convention center downtown where it would be fantastic if people that are staying in a hotel after a long convention can just go get, you know, some nachos and a nice drink. So I think it'd be great. Full support from me.
Thank you. Are there?
Neighborhood chair, but can I make comment?
I'll be inviting the public up in just a moment. Are there any other neighborhood chairs present who would like to speak to item 1? Okay, seeing none. Any members of the public who would like to? And please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Joel Raker, and I am the president of Explore Utah Valley, the Convention and Visitor Bureau for the county. We're based in the Visitor Information Center area at the Convention Center. And when I'm also a member of Downtown Provo, Inc., which is the organization Quinn runs. I'm a board member. But I'm here to speak in favor of it just as an aspect of hospitality and tourism. Brew pubs and microbreweries, and it's one of the hottest items in destinations nowadays. It's a thing that drives people to a community, or it helps them make the decision to come in. And you know, on a little bit of a side note, Qualtrics is holding some annual meetings at the Convention Center tomorrow and Friday. I have a daughter that lives in Seattle and works for Qualtrics, and she's here for those meetings. And last night, she's staying with us. She said, "Dad, people are overjoyed that they're at the Provo Marriott. They were at the Spring Hill Suites last year, and they couldn't get alcohol." And I talked to John Garfield at the Provo Marriott. He said he had 130 people for several hours in his establishment at the Marriott. So I'm grateful for what we have. I think we've got unique characteristics. We're not trying to promote really changing that a lot, but it's offering, offering to visitors something that helps make a destination unique, and making it very hospitality. I mean, we've got Utah, unfortunately, has a great reputation, and every time they can't get something or it seems a little strange, the finger goes straight to the predominant faith, and oftentimes that's not necessarily it. You know, I mean, I think that if Provo were willing to consider this and look at how this helps us move forward, it would help us when we do site tours and bring event planners out, which is a big piece of what we do. We just landed a 2020 NCAA gymnastics event in May 3rd to May 11th here in Utah County. They'll be staying at the Provo Marriott at 3,100 room nights for people from all over South America, Central America, and North America. Coaches, families, athletes. Again, we want them to have a positive experience so that we can use that to leverage and build even more. So I don't mean to dwell too much on that, but I support it, and again, because I think that done well, and it can add to the community and make it even a more attractive destination. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the community who would like to speak to item 1?
Hello, my name is Jared Neiswander. I own a restaurant group, and we will probably be the ones involved in pursuing this project if allowed by the city. So I'm very well versed in some of the questions that you all asked. We've been doing a feasibility study on this matter for the past several months. So to Mr. Knudsen's question, the state does, yes, they regulate it's actually, to make a correction, it's actually 70-30. So 30% of your sales cannot come from alcohol, more than 30%. The state audits it every year very strictly. They look at your numbers. If you're over 30, if you're 31%, you lose your liquor license. No questions asked. There's no wiggle room. So it's very heavily, and it's watched by the state. As far as regulations, it's state, city, and also federal. So you have to apply for a federal brewer's license, which is the most strict of all of them. It takes about a year to obtain. So there's a lot of oversight. It's not, some backroom bathtub gin kind of operation. So I had one other point. Sorry, for some reason I'm nervous. Yeah, so anyway, I guess, so just to summarize, so I'm obviously in agreement as well with what the gentleman here had to say. I think it would be just really to the benefit of Provo to kind of round things out. In Salt Lake City, some of these past brewers, because of the predominant faith in Utah, decided to go at the church, which I don't particularly agree with myself. We just want to coexist. That's all we want to do. It's a culture that's kind of rounding itself out. We're attracting a lot of outside visitors, tourists, all those kind of things, and we want to have opportunities for them as well. So we're not trying to come into this thing, start a fight, start naming beers that are in contrast to, we don't want to do any of that. We just want to have a nice place for adults that want to do what they enjoy. So I guess that's all. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other members of the public who would like to speak to item 1? All right, we'll close item 1 to public comment, and I'll turn it back over to the commissioners. Ms. Urquiaga.
Yeah, I kind of have a question about why we don't have more establishments that are serving alcohol if people are saying that it's only the Marriott or not very many places, because this does not change that. They have to have an alcohol license separate from the brewery license, right? To serve alcohol. So
Mixed drinks and things, yeah.
nothing's preventing people from getting that license if they qualify now. Not that I have anything against the microbreweries, but I'm just curious.
Quinn, would you come up to the microphone, please? We do have other restaurants in downtown that have liquor licenses. The Black Sheep Cafe, you can
There's
buy a beer
15
there.
in the downtown alone.
That was my question.
Yep. There's 15 that have alcohol licenses in the downtown alone.
I would imagine they're all Class B, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And do you have any idea how many of them would be interested in the microbrewery? Is it just 1 or 2?
The problem has been, in the past, it's been new concepts that wanted to open with a microbrewery that were turned away because we don't have the path currently. If this were opened, I'm sure that a couple would have the interest. But to be honest, the brewing machinery is enormous. And it's expensive. You need to have the space for it. The licensing, like you said, it mentions it's a year at least. It's quite cumbersome. So I don't know how many we'd have that would want to swap over. But we've had a handful that have had the desire to brew historically that haven't been able to because the path hasn't been there. Yeah. Okay. But that's just in the downtown that have 15 with licenses currently. There's more throughout the city.
Okay,
I'm not aware of an existing restaurant that is asked to convert to microbrewing. I'm not aware of one that's come in and asked that.
Okay.
Mr. Anderson.
Not at all arguing the approach here with the breweries, but from my perspective, this really is just a restaurant, whether they produce on site or not. So I'd almost prefer to just make the interpretation that whether you produce your beer on site or bring it from some other location, it doesn't matter, and treat it that way. But
We had a long discussion on that exact point.
okay, so
Well, I'll just say it seems like I've heard anecdotally, I don't know how much truth there is to it, that some conventioneers leave Provo because there is a lack of sort of evening activities, things like brew pubs, and go to some of our neighboring communities where they do have them.
They do.
So it seems as though, especially with the traffic flow that we have through the convention center and as that builds over time, that's a synergistic kind of business to allow in these zones.
It's just an attractiveness. class. It just is another element that,
Right.
it's been a game changer in Lehigh when Strap Tank, because that was something they were missing. Tons of food options, tons of, the growth, but once they got that Strap Tank, people are not going up to Sandy. They're congregating, going there, and busy, and they're feeding them.
Yeah.
You'd rather have the vehicular traffic closer to the establishment anyway, just from a convenience and a safety point of view. Provo had a brewery. It was, I think your grandparents and mine worked there. It was where the old health building is, and the proceeds used to fund the tabernacle. And that's what you read the history books if you dig into them. So what's old is new. I think it adds character and flavor and keeps businesses in downtown Provo. And that's where it should be.
The closest establishment like this we have is in Springville, and if you go in there any evening, you'll see a lot of families sitting there having dinner.
Yeah.
It doesn't look any different from any other restaurant that you'd find in Orem or Provo.
And if you visit these kinds of establishments in other communities, other states and things like that, it's that. I mean, I don't think it's one particular demographic that frequents them more than any other. It's just like any other restaurant.
Yeah.
That type of a thing, so. And it doesn't sound like there's a need to be a cheerleader, but there's a real perception about Utah County and what does and doesn't work here, and what people can and can't maybe enjoy. I think it goes beyond just tempering convention visitors and that type of a thing in terms of economic development, and having a decent place where you could bring somebody that's maybe considering doing business in the community for lunch or something like that. Those places just don't exist, not to slam the establishments that are in Provo, but they're not places that at least that I'm familiar with, that you'd want to take somebody if you're trying to make a particularly good impression on them and that type of a thing. And so
And that's
there's a place for this.
I was going to say, we spend thousands of dollars to bring event planners in. And as you're walking around the community, they're getting a flavor, a feel for it. What are their delegates going to do? I mean, we had the American Association of Physics Teachers, which was about 6 months ago. And it was huge. We had about $3 million of economic impact over 3,000 room nights. You talk to any of the small businesses that had an impact on them. We have to do a better job educating people that there's plenty of alcohol in downtown Provo. I mean, with 15 restaurants, that's not the issue. It's just what are the unique attractiveness? And unfortunately, as Quinn articulated, the two existing bars we have, thank God we have them. I'm glad we have them, but they're, they are what they are. And it's not necessarily somewhere you would take a meeting planner, although they're very busy when we have these delegates in town. I mean, they'll go to the watering holes, so, sorry.
They're not exactly upscale.
Right, and that's okay, that's okay, but we'd love to have some upscale and others to add to the mix.
Hopefully upscale would put pressure on them.
Exactly.
Introduce a little bit of competition.
Competition?
Not a bad thing. Ms. Jensen.
I just had a clarifying question. You said that alcohol sales can be 30%. Is that a measure based on the amount of money that they spend on their ticket, or is it like a per item sold, or how do they measure that?
Money.
Okay.
So if your bill is $100 and your steak was $70 and your wine was $30, that's that equation.
Okay.
It doesn't include sales tax. Just
I just didn't know if people were like getting their beverages with a bag of chips or something, and that counts, because it's 1-to-1.
allow one to purchase alcohol, but then it's
Someone else has to buy a couple steaks in order to balance it out.
No. I believe you're misunderstanding. So this number is just for the state when they audit to basically say, okay, you guys are operating as a restaurant as opposed to a bar, which is a different liquor license from a Class B. So if you were hovering over that, then you might have to consider like changing your whole business plan, which nobody would want to do.
But it's a 30% for the overall establishment, not per bill, is what I'm saying. So the next person would have to order something that weighed it out. Okay. So it is possible for somebody to go to one of these places and sort of treat it like a bar by getting the bare minimum.
Yeah, and then at that point it becomes, the staff is maintaining their training that they receive from the state, which
Encourages them to move along.
overindulging.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, they don't want to lose their liquor license.
Because if somebody goes out, they get into a wreck, all that stuff is monitored. Your
Right.
driver's license, now they're scanned into a computer, and it stays there for 7 days or whatever. So there's a lot of accountability.
Well, I think it puts pressure on the establishment to have good food, so you bring families in.
Sorry, we're kind of out of order.
I'm ready to make a motion if that helps.
All right, Mr. Howard?
Madam Chairman, I move that we recommend to the Provo City Council an ordinance amendment to allow the approval of restaurants with an ancillary microbrewery as permitted use in the SC3, DT1, and DT2 zones.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Do we have a second for Mr. Howard's move? Seconded by Ms. Urquiaga. All those in favor of forwarding a positive recommendation to Municipal Council on item 1?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, that's unanimous. We'll forward a unanimous motion for approval of item 1.
Thank you for all you do.
All right, on to item 2. Provo City Public Works Department requests a general plan amendment to correct language in Area 5 of the annexation policy map to replace approximately 5,200 feet, in quotes, with, in quotes, approximately 4,876 feet as an existing water pressure zone. This has impact on the North Timpview neighborhood, and Mr. Mills will present item 2.
Thank you very much. So as was just read in, Provo City has an appendix to the general plan that is actually our annexation policy plan, basically guiding what areas of the city we intend or anticipate may be annexed into the city over time. In the annexation policy map and the accompanying documentation for that, in Area 5, which is up in northeast Provo, the Public Works Department staff were reviewing this and discovered that the current policy states that there's an existing water pressure zone that can be serviced up to an elevation of 5,200 feet. That is not correct, and so they just want to correct that with the proper elevation, which they're stating is 4,876 feet in elevation. So simple minor change. Unfortunately, we have to go through this entire process of sending it to the Planning Commission and to the City Council. So the city staff, of course, recommends that the Planning Commission would forward a positive recommendation. So I'm available for any questions, but probably your best resource would be Mr. Day from Public Works if you have any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Mills? Ms. Jensen?
Just to eliminate having to go through this process again, is it necessary to include Area 6, or is there no need for a water tank ever in Area 6 that you would need to have that language?
I'll let Mr. Day answer that question
Mr.
because
Day.
I have no idea.
David Day with Provo City Public Works. In the annexation policy, it didn't specify any elevations other than in Area 5. So that's why we're changing Area 5. So, and that's like 2 pressure zones higher. There's no way we could supply it to that elevation without building a new tank, and we don't have any plans on doing that. So,
Ms. Urquiaga?
I'm wondering if the other zones don't have an elevation, why is it necessary for this one?
Good question.
good point. Other than it was in there before, and I'm not sure why it was put in there.
It seems
we
it would be
noticed
more
it.
straightforward to eliminate it.
I guess we could do that other than,
Doesn't that,
yeah, we
wouldn't
could
that
have
give you
to
more flexibility if you?
strike a little bit more of the text out, but yeah, we could do that.
I would only add to that it may have the reverse effect to say that if there isn't a limitation on the serviceability in that area, so there may be additional applications or pressure to develop at higher pressure zones. At least this way, there's kind of a limitation, but that's just an observer from the outside that has no
I'm just
understanding.
thinking, in terms of future application. If we need one, then maybe it needs to, even though it wouldn't necessarily be required for other parts of the city, maybe it should apply citywide so that as the city grows, it is already there for future development. Anything that is in a high elevation area. Rather than saying it's just this zone, does it make sense to say the city?
Yeah, if you look at that map, you have all of those zones broken out in unincorporated Provo area. So those areas are part of our annexation policy declaration. And we've just identified those areas as what would need to happen. And in specifically Area 5, we know we can service up to that elevation currently. Now, that doesn't change that if, say, a developer came in and said, hey, I want to build a whole bunch of infrastructure on our own cost, not the city cost, on their cost, we could build new tanks and go a lot higher than that. But what this is saying is currently, this is the only service we provide in this area. If you want anything in addition to that, it's all on your dime, so to speak.
So you're limiting the city's obligation,
Yeah.
in a sense, yeah.
Yeah, that's like 324 feet difference, so that's 2 pressure zones. That's quite high. We do have areas in Provo that we can service to that elevation, but they're a long way away from this area. So I think it was just a mistake that was made back in the day.
Any other questions for Mr. Day? Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, so today, serving above that elevation, the 4,800 foot elevation, we can't provide water with the facilities that are available today with suitable pressure to allow for additional development. That's what.
Yeah, in Area 5 or 6,
Area
but
5.
6 isn't defined, so.
Okay. But again, if somebody wanted to fund that, then
Yeah,
that,
they could build another tank up at whatever elevation that corresponds to other tanks we have in the city. We don't like to just build an arbitrary elevation of a tank. We like to match it with another tank so that they can float between each other. When they both get full, they can help each other keep the supply adequate. So that's the best way to build a system. It has the redundancy and it's more serviceable. But I don't know if that answers your question or not.
it does. Like in Area 5, what's the development potential there if water was available? Is it pretty readily or pretty well suited to be developed if water is available?
That is about 50% over the 30% slope.
Okay.
So there are other issues, geotechnical slope. But if they had all the water they needed, then it would just be a probably normal development, putting in all the utilities, complying with all of our city standards. Right now, the thing that stopped development in that whole area has been the water issue.
And in 6, is it similar there, just in terms of
Yeah.
development potential?
Yeah, there's no water up there. That takes you up onto Squaw Peak.
Yeah, it looks.
So and
Might be a small part of 6, maybe that.
yeah,
Realistically.
that
could
lower
be.
piece.
Relative to just like development regulations going up the hillside, is there anything that says thou shalt not build above a certain elevation on the mountain, or that any It's just the availability of services and the ability to access it with roads of a certain grade or whatever. And
Yes, that we don't have any regulations like that yet, but based on some city council direction, Brandon Larson in our office is working on kind of a hillside protection zone.
yeah,
It would probably be called something like CE1 after the county, but modeled more after the Salt Lake County's FCAUS. But as part of that discussion, we've talked about, should this be the point of striking a line on the hillside, like other communities have done, that just say you can't develop above that. We're working on that ordinance right now.
is there much development pressure, like to develop in Area 5 or other places that are higher up than where development exists today?
Well, you heard an application just a month or so ago for about 160 acres in areas 5 and 6. Right in there, yeah.
Okay.
That's the only application we've had up on the hillside, and, well, the last time we had an annexation request up there was 4 or 5 years ago.
Is this issue a key limiter?
The water issue that David's talked about has always been an issue to that development. This change they're making is housekeeping. We've been telling people the correct elevation for years. But that development has been told about the water tank issue and water pressure issues from day one, well over a year ago. Did that answer your question, Dave?
Yep, thanks.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Day? No. All right, thank you. Are there any neighborhood chairs present who would like to address item 2? Any members of the public who would like to address item 2? All right, I'll turn it back over to the commissioners for a motion or further discussion. Ms. Jensen?
I was just wondering if there's any advantage to including Area 6 in it, just so that this doesn't have to come back for discussion if somebody asks the question of development there. Is that necessary?
Mr. Day?
We just found the error in Area 5. Area 6 doesn't specify, so I think we're okay in Area 6.
But it's still a restriction to Area 6, so would it be better to change the language now while we're talking about it so that they're both the same, or is that unnecessary? That's my question.
Do you have that Area 6 available? I don't know the exact wording, but...
There's no wording on the text. Does it exist, or is there not even any wording for Area 6?
There's no elevation on Area 6.
It doesn't make sense to me why they're not both treated equally, I guess is.
Yeah, that's.
So, Mr. Dave, would it
Needed on one, it seems like you would need it on the other.
would it be helpful to, continue this item and have Public Works staff look into it a little bit more to see
yeah,
if
that's fine. There's really no urgency that I know of with this.
That, or can we state
Can
it
we
in the
just-
motion?
Yeah, I was going to say, can't we just say in our motion, just include the language in Area 6 and be done with it?
Rather than continue it?
Yeah, we could specify the exact same elevation in Area 6. Yeah.
And that would be
and then I
good
can
with Public Works, okay.
I can find the actual verbiage similar to what's on the right side of your screen for Area 6. Incorporate that language before it goes to council.
It would just say existing water pressure zones can serve this area to an elevation of approximately 4876 feet.
Just add that
That would
sentence
just
in
be
there.
that sentence would be added to Area 5 or Area 6.
I think that would save time and effort rather than having this continued and come back before us again. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Day while he's up? No. All right, thank you. Okay, commissioners. Sounds like we're ready to state a motion.
I'd be happy to do that.
Ms. Jensen?
Let me know if I hammer it. So I make a motion to recommend for approval item 2. Is that the way we would say it to the city council? Requesting a general plan amendment to correct the language in Area 5 and Area 6 of the annexation policy map. to replace approximately 5,200 feet with approximately 4,876 feet as an existing water pressure zone.
Second.
Let me just state the item, make sure it's good with staff. So item 2, as stated by Ms. Jensen's motion, was to include Area 6 along with Area 5 in the new elevation of 4,876 feet for the existing water pressure zone. Correct? Okay. Do we have a second for her motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Howard. All those in favor of forwarding a recommendation for approval on item 2 to Municipal Council?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, then we will forward a positive recommendation on item 2 to council, and that was unanimous. Get tongue-tied. Right, item 3, Courtyard at Jamestown LLC requests an ordinance text amendment to the professional office zone, section 14.16.120, to allow the Development Services Director to vary the permissible lot coverage percentage by up to 5% if the lot or parcel is adjacent to a public amenity, such as a public trail or park. This has citywide application, and Mr. Larson will present item 3.
Thank you. I just handed out an email from Mike Rowe, neighborhood chair, for this area, and he just had a couple of questions, and you can see my response to him in that email. A few, well, I'd say about 2 months ago, you gave a recommendation, or actually approved an expansion for the Jamestown Assisted Living Facility. And after that approval, we thought we were going to go on to building permits, but then they started working on updating titles, and in going through through a title search, they found that they have a title issue on a small portion of property. If you remember, that property included a small, narrow strip of land on the east side that included a portion of Lover's Lane. Well, that portion of land may have some title issues, so they want to exclude that portion from their project. And in doing that, if they exclude that portion from their project, they run into a problem with the lot coverage requirement in the PO zone. Lot coverage requirement, the requirement basically states that you can't have any more than a 30% lot coverage for buildings and structures. So their proposal's pretty straightforward. They're asking essentially that the city consider amending the PO zone to allow the Development Services Director for him to have the authority to vary that by up to 5%. So staff reviewed that application and felt that felt that the kind of the basis behind it seemed reasonable. We wanted to touch up the language a bit. One of the things that we thought was important is, seemed like there was some subjectivity in giving the authority for a person to grant grant a variance or an adjustment when we could just make it a by right, a by right situation where you could allow 35% rather than the 30% if you were adjacent to some certain public amenities. And that brings me to the next point. Their proposal stated that the Development Services Director could adjust the percentage if it laid adjacent to public amenities. We felt that it would be important to kind of dial that in or define it a little bit better. Public amenities could include a rec center or the Peaks Ice Arena. The rec center may not have a lot of open space associated with it, and I think that was kind of the point behind it was, okay, if we're going to give them a break on the lot coverage, let's do it because there's some open space surrounding the property. And so we thought, well, let's kind of dial it in and say if they're adjacent to a trailer park, which are certainly two public uses that typically have a pretty open nature. So staff drafted kind of a revised proposal, and you have that there in your staff report. So I think this seems like I think staff, rather the applicant's proposal is fairly reasonable, but I think staff has kind of refined the proposal or the proposal a bit, and so staff would recommend approval of the application as long as staff's language is used. Our recommendation would be based, of course, on the findings and conclusions in the staff report. So again, we'd recommend that you recommend approval to the City Council of staff's revised amendment in attachment number 2.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification.
Yes.
The item states this would allow the Development Services Director to vary the permissible lot coverage. But
Yeah.
the revised amendment sounds like that would just be an administrative task that staff could execute.
Well, yeah, I don't even know. The only thing that staff would really need to do is to verify that that a property lies adjacent to a park or trail. It would become staff's proposal would be, rather than someone subjectively making it, having the authority to make a decision whether or not to approve the adjustment or variance. We think it's more fair to just say, okay, if you lie adjacent to a park or trail, you can have a 35% lot coverage rather than the 30. Because of the open nature, there would be more of an abundance of open land adjacent to the property.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, Ms. Jensen?
I have a question about that adjacent trail area. Is that included in the property, the square footage of the property? Like this proposal by Jamestown, where they're including Lover's Lane, but then they're not because they don't have it. Does it have to be included in the original square footage of the proposal?
No, absolutely not. It would just be, and if you look in the language, it uses the word contiguous. So it wouldn't be a situation like we had here where they had it in and now they don't. It's just if you lie adjacent to a park or trail, you can utilize this allowance.
Because the only loophole I can see there that would be problematic is that if there's a little teeny park or trail that's minuscule, that would allow them to all of a sudden capitalize on the 35%. Where someone there's a neighborhood walkway between two properties, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, because we've got this, we can now open this up for development with greater square footage possibilities. And so that's what I worry. How do we measure what the neighboring space is to determine whether it actually qualifies for the original intent of the language?
Staff considered that. We actually evaluated, there were 235 lots that lighted, there are 235 lots in the PO zone. And we found that there were 26 lots that lied adjacent to a park or trail. And of those 26 parcels, the vast majority, the median, how do I say this? So the vast majority of them didn't have that situation that you're talking about. The smallest amount of frontage that any of the lots had, so the one lot that would kind of fit the bill that you're talking about, it had a 5%
there was only 5% of that lot that fronted on a park or trail, and it was a really unusually shaped parcel. It may have been mapped wrong as well, and so the rest of the parcels, the next parcel had a minimum of about 70 feet of frontage along that park or trail, so that's pretty substantial, I would say. And as it goes for adjacency, like as far as like a lot or a lot side next to a park or trail, the average was 23% and the median was 24%. So on average, 25% of these adjacent parcels.
So they're fairly sizable.
Yeah, they're fairly sizable. So staff did definitely consider that, but based on the data that we have, it doesn't look like that's an issue.
So you don't think that would be taken advantage of? Because the follow-up question to that is, how do we ensure or guarantee that the 5% space that we're giving them is maintained as a public space? You know, right now we might have the parameters to approve a project, but then down the road somebody sells that property and, you know, for example, Lover's Lane, and it's no longer a public access or a public trail or a public space. So now we've got a building that we approved on property that's going to be either Lover's Lane would be undevelopable because it's too crammed in there, or Jamestown would be too close to whatever comes in next.
That is a possibility. The vast majority, and I've got, you can see up here on the screen, what you're seeing, the green is the parks, and the red, the trails, and the pink is the zones. The vast majority of these, let me go to the next, this is kind of the set, what you were looking at first was the north end of Provo, this is the south end of Provo. The vast majority of these are public parks. There are a few private parks, and Lover's Lane is part of the reason staff came up with some alternative language is because there's some question about whether Lover's Lane is public or private, and so yes, that is a concern. I think it's a small concern based on the number of parks and trails and linear feet. I think that's a small concern, but there is nothing that's been proposed to make sure that park's going to stay public or stay in public hands. I think if probably our biggest concern would be the private parks and trails, and there's just not that many of them in the ones that we're seeing on these maps.
In the specific case of Lover's Lane, that has been used by the public for so many years that for all intents and purposes, it belongs to the public.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the legal rights are of the person who has their name on that plat map somewhere that.
Yeah, I think if they tried to cut off the access, there'd be a big battle between the city and that owner because it's a public throughway.
Okay. So if we don't see any loopholes of how we can guarantee that these public spaces stay public spaces, that was my concern, is that if we start giving exceptions that can disappear, then that's a problem. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for staff? Ms. Urquiaga?
This isn't a question, it's just a wording comment. You've got an extra 2 in B. It should just be a private trail which the owner of the lot has equal legal authority to. It doesn't need to be to which the owner has authority to.
Oh, sure. We'll
Semantics.
We can definitely.
Yeah, it's the lawyer in me.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? All right. Is the applicant Courtyard at Jamestown? If you'd like to speak to any of the comments you've heard and.
Yes. So my name is Kenny Raybar from Stellar Senior Living. We own the Courtyard of Jamestown there in Provo. That fight is very difficult, by the way, with Lover's Lane parcel. So it's been about a year battle. So actually, this is a strange piece of land. title is like basically uninsurable, and that's why we're having troubles with it, is we can't get insurance on it, which means our investors won't fund any of the project until we figure out how to insure it. It was actually acquired by the current owner, Mary June Hamblin, by adverse possession, one of those cases where they camped on it for years and years and years and started paying taxes, so it's kind of one of those strange ones. And yeah, it's super narrow, long, skinny. You really can't build much on it at all. It's kind of a worthless piece of land except for a trail, in which it is used quite a bit in doing research on it. You see people running past it almost all summer. We were working a lot with the Parks Department on how to figure out how to add it to our current parcel, because we own, or we have a 99-year lease on the two parcels that Jamestown and the addition are on. So with that, it's been like a nightmare. Like, we were ready to construct about a year ago until we found out this. We were over by about 1%. Well, the first time we came around, we had 31.7% lot coverage. And the problem with that is it's a 3-story building. So if you chop off about 3,000 square feet of building, it cuts out 6 units, which is about $20,000 worth of revenue per month. And it makes the project a little bit less easy to justify and to bring to Provo. So, but with that, yeah, we're just requesting to, whether it's an agency of somebody to maybe assess each situation, in which the city deemed maybe just doing it where there is a public trail, because we feel like it's a great piece of land behind it. I mean, if you look at Jamestown, it doesn't look like it's overly developed. One good thing about assisted living is we have tiny parking lots, very little traffic going to and from. So in it as a case in itself, it's a wonderful lot to have a higher permissible lot coverage, because technically we're required to have half of a parking stall per unit we have, which is the lowest out of pretty much everything. So since nobody really drives. And I'm trying to think some of the other questions. I guess, do you guys have any questions?
Any questions? All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Right, are there any neighborhood chairs present who would like to address item 3? Any members of the public who would like to address item 3? All right, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to the commissioners for further discussion, comment, motion.
I like the approach, but I'm pretty comfortable just simply raising the 30 to 35 too, across the board. So either way, I'm.
For lot coverage. Yeah.
Per
Mr.
the
Howard?
attachment 2, is that what you're saying, per attachment 2?
That or just simply changing the 30 to 35.
Oh, I see.
So there would be no amendment like this. It would
I don't
just be
think that's-
changing that number in the code.
A big enough change that would really sweat it too much. Yeah.
I would tend to agree with Mr. Anderson. Ms. Jensen?
If you did that, would there be any people who were denied their plans because 35 was the deal breaker? 30 was the deal breaker? Okay. You just don't want to have any legal battles.
Well, if you move, I'll second it. Because I'm not sure I'll get the
Put it that way.
verbiage right.
Spot here.
Mr. Anderson?
Item number 3, the proposed text amendment. I recommend that the city council approve the proposed amendment by simply changing the allowed lot coverage percentage from 30% to 35%.
Second.
Do we have a second for Mr. Anderson's motion?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Howard. All those in favor of forwarding a positive recommendation as so stated by Mr. Anderson to increase the lot coverage to 35%?
Aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? All right, that is unanimous. Then we'll forward a positive recommendation for item 3, increasing the permissible lot coverage for the PO zone to 35%. Yeah, no, that was much easier to understand. All right, our final item for the evening, item 6. The Community and Neighborhood Department requests ordinance text amendments to shift certain conditional uses to permitted uses in the Neighborhood Shopping Center, SC1 zone, the Community Shopping Center, SC2 zone, and the Regional Shopping Center, SC3 zone. This has citywide application, and Mr. Weaver will read in item 6.
Thank you. So staff saw that there are a considerable amount of conditional use. Let me backtrack. There are permitted uses in each zone, and within those each zone there are conditional uses, but those uses are still permitted based on perhaps conditions are going to be added upon those zones or upon those codes. Provo City uses the standard land use code to identify you have a use and a code attached to it. We went through every single code to think critically and analytically, would staff assign a condition to this? If there's no condition that's going to be assigned to the specific type of use, then we should shift it to the permitted use category. Within that allows to streamline, to allow for businesses to come in easier without doing conditional use permits, reduces the amount of time that staff has to process conditional use permits, and allows the bandwidth to be greater to do additional planning work for it. I'm happy to go through the zones, but primarily majority of the permitted uses were either the number was broadened. Example, instead of being 5413, it went to 5410 or 5400 to allow for of like uses to be within that zone. A lot of the permitted uses that were in each shopping center zone were very alike, and so we went to a broader category of said 5400 to allow for all those types of uses within the zone. Staff has had zero comments from neighborhood chairs or the public regarding this. One thing staff did notice on the SC2 and 3 zones, the conditional uses initially did say under 6299 that wedding chapels and reception centers only, and that was supposed to be shifted to the permitted uses. However, I err on my part for not striking out, for not allowing that within the permitted uses. It should be allowed there. Additionally, the text on the permitted uses says, it says, $62.99, correct. So that was just an error on my part from shifting it from one to the other. Otherwise, everything should reflect an accurate transition.
What page was that on?
Attachment number 2 and attachment 3, but on page page 14 and page 17 for SC2.
And these all follow the working session discussions we
Correct.
had in November and December.
Additionally, the text on SC2 says recreation center when it should say reception center. That's just a
Typo.
error on the text itself. But yes, this does follow the discussions we've had in the previous work sessions.
Right. So this streamlines things considerably
Correct.
and eliminates a lot of the conditional uses.
Correct.
Great.
If there needs to be an item that should garner a conditional use, perhaps what staff recommends is that that is still a permitted use and just add in some criteria for it to allow it to continue to be permitted, and the conditions are listed within the zone.
Great. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Weaver? Ms. Urquiaga?
I'm just, as far as the number layout for the standard code, is that something that is available to the public or developers?
Yes, it's available on our website.
Okay, so they can find the numbers.
So they can access it and look at exactly what we have that would be allowed within the category.
Isn't that also universal? So it's not something Provo made up for their land uses. It's a universal land use code, right?
It is. It's gone outdated to the point where there aren't very many cities that still use it, especially the 4-digit code. Like we've talked about before, when you go to 4 digits, it becomes very specific. Like dentist has a different 4-digit number from periodontist, which has a different 4-digit number from orthodontist. So when Javin talks about backing it up and just calling it 6,500 instead of
Just simplifies.
6,513, it would allow for all of those without specifying each one individually.
Yeah.
Uh,
Makes sense. Any other questions for staff? All right. Any neighborhood chairs present who would like to address item 6? Any members of the public who would like to address item 6?
Good evening, Commissioners. Scott Bowles, General Manager of the Provo Town Center and also resident of the Franklin neighborhood. Just want to commend Mr. Weaver. We sat down earlier this week and we went through these recommendations. Provo Town Center and Brixton Capital owners fully support this move. This makes our job a lot easier in trying to find a variety of uses, especially what Mr. Pepperoni has been talking about, and just allowing more broad swath of uses rather than getting into the micromanagement of uses inside of these zones. It makes the efforts for leasing and development much easier, so I highly recommend approval. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Bowles. All right. Seeing no other comments from the public, I will turn it back over to the commissioners for further discussion and or motion.
We discussed this before, so I think we have a pretty clear understanding of what's going on. I think we should do it. With
All right,
that,
Mr. Howard?
Madam Chairman, I move that we approve an ordinance text amendments to shift certain conditional uses to permitted uses in the Neighborhood Shopping Center, SC1 zone, the Community Shopping Center, SC2 zone, and the Regional Shopping Center, SC3 zone, as presented and with the error correction that you brought up on, what, 6299 or whatever that was.
Great. And that's for a recommendation to council.
Actually, I think we approve it, don't we?
It's a code amendment, so municipal council.
Okay, I
approves that.
recommend. It didn't have an asterisk.
It didn't
so-
have an asterisk. Great.
Okay, yeah, I recommend to the city council. There we go.
Great. Do we have a second for Mr. Howard's motion? Seconded by Mr. Knutson. All those in favor of recommending approval of item 6 to municipal council?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that was unanimous. We'll forward a positive recommendation on item 6 to council. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Mr. Howard, do we have a second? Seconded by Ms. Urquiaga. So we are adjourned. Thank you.